Your presentation slides are now complete, and it's time to prepare for what is the biggest fear for a lot of us: public speaking. Standing up and presenting in front of our peers, whether it's 5 people or 500, can be very daunting. We all worry about looking at our audience and finding them whispering amongst each other, immersing themselves into their phones, or perhaps the worst of all, falling asleep. In the final portion of this course, I'm going to share some tips to help you ensure that none of those things happen and your audience leaves the presentation not only wowed by your content and design, but also by your delivery. Professional speaker Alash Karia is adamant about using stories because of how irresistible they are to the human mind. They activate our imaginations, creating a sort of mental movie in our own brains. According to Karia, one of the best ways to capture an audience is by providing sensory details that allow them to actually see, hear, feel, or even smell the different stimuli from the story. 12-year-old speaker from Kenya, Richard Tereri, told a captivating story through the use of graphic images. While they may be difficult to look at, the images are powerful and moving. His story becomes clear when you can physically see what he and his family faced versus just having to listen to it. Continuing off of Richard's example, another tip would be to include a personal story. Everybody loves a good comeback, or one where the subject defied all odds and achieved a goal. Just like in movies, the most captivating presentation stories are those of good guy defeating bad guy, coming up from nothing to thriving, the quest for treasure, whatever that may be, and the story of a changed person through different experiences and lessons. Leslie Morgan told her story of domestic violence. Often people wonder why individuals don't get out of those harrowing situations, but as Leslie explains in her presentation, it's not that easy. A lot of these stories also include our third tip: creating suspense. Activating suspense in your audience requires 2 things: a conflict and a plot. With these, you'll create a roller coaster within your story that'll have your audience on the edge of their seats, wondering what's coming next. There's a few paths that you can follow that are proven effective. The first is simply going through your story in chronological order, telling the events as they happened from beginning to end. If you want to throw a curveball by leading your audience into a predictable storyline, but an unexpected turn of events occurs, that can be effective as well. Another method is putting your audience right into the middle of the conflict from the very beginning. This will grab their attention from the start. Or you can start with a teaser. Zach Ibrahim did this in a TED Talk where he started by disclosing he's the son of a terrorist before leading his audience on the journey he took to not follow his father's footsteps. Bringing characters to life is another important aspect of any strong presentation. Simply calling characters by their names isn't enough. You must provide key details as to the appearances, interests, emotions, anything that will give your audience a strong image of who that person is. Characters should be easy to identify throughout your presentation. Malcolm Gladwell is no stranger to telling stories, and he mastered this technique talking about Howard in his presentation about spaghetti sauce, of all things. My 5th tip is to show, not tell. What do I mean? You must take your audience into your world through heavy description. Strong adjectives describing scenes can make all the difference. Construct each scene one by one. Don't just speak at your audience, but bring them with you into your world. Dhananjaya Hediyorachichi was the world champion of public speaking in 2014, and his speech did just this. As you move forward through your delivery, you'll want to build up to a star moment. In other words, something they'll always remember. You want your audience to be talking or thinking about your presentation for weeks, if not years to come. So how can you accomplish that? Well, Nancy Duarte recommends provocative images, dramatization, or statistics that will completely shock your audience. Need an example to spark a few ideas? The one and only Bill Gates gave a TED Talk about the effects of malaria. In it, he opened a jar containing hundreds of mosquitoes and released them into the room. It was something that nobody ever expected, and one that the audience will surely never forget. Our last tip for not only this section, but for the entire course is to end with a positive takeaway. You should do it each day you leave work, every time you're practicing a sport, and you should leave your audience with it as well in a presentation. Why? Because it leaves people wanting more. Akash Karia analyzed 200 of the most effective TED Talks, and his key takeaway was that they not only included a plot and a conflict, but a positive ending. Even if the presentation is mostly negative, there's ways to spark learning or how the future is brighter than the past. Don't focus on the antagonist, but rather how the protagonist is better off and has a promising future. We want to take steps forward, not remain glued to the past.